Okay, today we're going to be taking notes on evolution by natural selection. So to start off, we're going to need to define both of these terms. We've got evolution and we've got natural selection. They actually mean different things. So to start off with, I want to define evolution. And evolution is a change in the allele frequency in a population over time. And what this is really saying is that we're going to have more of some alleles in the population than other alleles over time. So a couple of things I want to be careful with. Populations evolve, individuals do not. And we're going to say that the population has evolved anytime there's a change in their genes. So if half of the population has the brown hair allele and half of the population has the blonde hair allele, and then we look 200 years later and it turns out that 60% of the population has the brown hair allele, then we're going to say that that population evolved. The next is natural selection. And natural selection is when organisms that are better adapted to their environment survive and produce more offspring. So we often talk about natural selection as being survival of the fittest. I hope that's right. Where fitness is actually just your ability to reproduce. So if you're having more babies, then you're more fit than the rest of the population. I have no idea if that's supposed to have one T or two. Okay, let's talk about our requirements here. So in order for us to have natural selection resulting in evolution, resulting in a change in our population, we have to hit some requirements. And you're going to be doing some CERs for this unit. So make sure in your CERs that you're including all of these requirements. Requirement number 1, the trait has to be heritable. And so that means that you have to get the trait from your parents through your genes. So it's passed down through genes. And there's a couple reasons why this is important. One, we're talking about that allele frequency, which is your genes. And two, if it's not a heritable trait, then it doesn't really matter if your parents have the genes or not, and therefore evolution is not going to be able to act on it. So for example, if I have a tattoo, that tattoo is not because of my genes. Therefore, it is not heritable. It's not as if people who have a whole bunch of tattoos have babies that are born with a bunch of tattoos. Therefore, you're not going to be able to say that people with tattoos are, say, better fit for their environment and able to have more babies, and they pass on those tattoos. That just doesn't happen. My kid does not come out all tatted up. That being said, if I have a tall person, that height is passed on through their genes. There are environmental factors that affect height, but it is also affected by the genes, and so we would expect the babies of a tall person to end up being taller than the babies of a short person. If that's the case, then that trait can be passed on, and natural selection can act on that trait to result in evolution in our population. Number 2, we have to have some variation. So this is important because if the entire population is exactly the same, then we're not going to be able to have some organisms that are better adapted to their environment. There has to be some difference in the population in order for there to be some that survive better and some that survive worse. Otherwise, it's just a completely random process that would just be picking off random individuals. So this variation is going to be really important. And variation is caused by mutations. So remember that mutations are happening to our DNA. Thus, our variation is happening inside of our genes, and then those genes are passed on to the offspring. All right, number 3. There has to be some sort of an advantage. So this variation must result in some individuals that are better. If the variation isn't resulting in some individuals that are better suited to their environment, then that variation is not going to be acted on by natural selection. So we're not going to have an increased survival. So an example of this could be that we have brown-haired people and blonde-haired people. And it turns out that your hair color does not affect whether or not you're able to survive and reproduce better. So hair color, while it could evolve, we could end up with a change in our population over time, say more blonde-haired people or more brown-haired people. That evolution would not be because of natural selection. Natural selection only occurs when organisms are better adapted to survive. So the advantage has to result in some individuals being better and therefore having more offspring. And that's going to lead to my next point. So this last one is going to be reproduction. Natural selection only is going to work if the advantage affects reproduction. So we have to have organisms that are better have more babies. All right, and then that I'm going to put, it leads into one more thing. So I'm not going to actually add it here. I'm just going to put up here selection. Because all of these things are going to lead to us having a selection. The environment is selecting some organisms that, because of their variation, have an advantage and therefore are able to produce more offspring that have their traits. It all kind of goes hand in hand. So, there are some steps that we're always going to use when we're talking about evolution by natural selection. Step number 1, a population. So we're going to have in our population some individuals are born with helpful traits. Let's be careful about a couple of things. One, we're talking about a population here. In that population, there are individuals, but I don't really care on an individual level. I'm caring about evolution on a population level, and that's because populations can change their traits, but individuals can't change their heritable traits. What you're born with, you have. It's in your genes. You can't change it, so an individual cannot evolve. So, helpful is also in parentheses, quotation marks here, not parentheses. Helpful is important because what's helpful in one environment might actually be hurtful in another environment. So we're talking about things that are helpful for these specific conditions. Step number 2. Individuals with those helpful traits survive and reproduce more often than other individuals. And this is really important because they have to pass on those traits. If they're able to survive, but they never have any babies, those traits are not passed on, and they're not going to end up in the next generation, and therefore the population is not going to evolve because of them. So the individuals have to pass on those traits, so they have to be reproducing. The next step, step number 3, is that the offspring of helpful trait parents are more likely to survive and be adapted for their environment. So, offspring of, we're going to call them helpful trait parents. So if the parents have that helpful trait, we're talking about their offspring. They are more likely to be born with the helpful trait. So if it's helpful to be taller, then our tall parents are going to have babies, and those babies are more likely to be tall. Last step here is over many generations. So this is saying it's going to take a lot of time. Over many generations, the population will become better adapted to the environment and that's evolution by natural selection. So let's be careful about a few things. We've already talked about the fact that evolution is occurring to our population. It's not happening to individuals. Next, these helpful traits, they occur because of mutations, and mutations are random. You're just as likely to have a mutation that negatively affects survival as positively affects survival. But the ones that are going to be able to positively affect that survival are going to end up being passed down and given to their offspring, which are then going to pass on that trait. And so those helpful mutations are going to end up being more in the population than disadvantageous mutations. That being said, an organism cannot choose to get a mutation. Those mutations are random. So just because it might be advantageous to be faster doesn't mean that the mutation to be faster is going to happen in our population. All right, the last thing then is that evolution occurs on existing traits. If the trait isn't available for natural selection to act on it, then even though that trait might be really beneficial, we're not going to see it evolve. So mutations are random, and evolution impacts existing traits. Just because I might want to have wings doesn't mean that I'm going to have a mutation that's going to allow my offspring to grow wings and therefore be able to fly and therefore be better adapted to their environment. Evolution only acts on existing traits. So there we go. We've got our requirements, we've got our steps, and our definitions, and we're done.